My father passed at noon on September 18th, 1995. I would remember that day for the rest of my living days because that's when he last terrorized me and my mother. A foggy autumn Monday morning. He woke up at about 10, demanded breakfast, and spat it in disgust on the floor after the first bite. The kitchen door stood slightly ajar and I peeked through, too afraid to even ask for food with him around the house. "Devil woman, what is this? Am I a fool to you? Are you trying to poison me? I'll teach you a lesson." He screamed as if possessed by ungodly spirits. He would then proceed to beat her. He would occasionally beat me, but those instances didn't occur as often. My mother screamed and begged, but it didn't matter to the monster. He stopped whenever he saw fit to stop, probably when the booze voices in his head gave him explicit instructions. "I hope he dies, Mom," I whimpered. I couldn't stand to see my mom like that. "I hope he burns for what he's doing to you. All these things you have to endure." Because of her swollen face, she didn't want to say anything. She just moaned, hurt and desperate, and sick of that pathetic excuse of a husband who sometimes wore a father's mask. He got his much-needed satisfaction and went straight to the village bar. After a couple of drinks, the alcohol erased the few physical and mental human features that he had. His skin hung from his face as if the flesh began to melt right off the bone. He couldn't speak. All the words came out as the mumblings of a madman, and he lost all sense of direction, mainly meaning that he got home walking in zigzag on the old and worn country road. He was an evil, ugly, and bitter man who couldn't love anything. Hate filled his black heart and the cyanide of desperation ran through his veins. He didn't care about anything and only knew how to ask for things with a sense of immense entitlement. He bowed down to the only god that he knew: alcohol. The saddest thing was that no one knew how violent my dad was. The rest of the villagers knew him only as a good-for-nothing drunk, one of the many drunks in the village. My mother did all the work in and around the house. She cleaned, cooked, fed the animals, tended the garden, and cared for me. She said that he wasn't always like that, but with time, he drank more until he finally gave in and the addiction took over. I wanted him to die a million times before. I hated him with every ounce of my soul. I had wished never to see him again, an all-familiar monster wearing a father's face. At last, the bleak gods that reigned in the heavens above found fit to grant me my most burning wish: my father's death. When he returned from that sorry excuse of a bar, where by the way the owners used to scam people by speeding the process of getting them drunk or driving the prices of drinks up. Of course, the poor drunks didn't ever see the problem. The owners, a young fellow named Bogdan and his wife Karina, used to laugh and pretend to care about the drunks' problems. They did with a smile while screwing them over or handing them drinks that they never ordered. These two are not crucial to the story. I mention them and their behavior because this village has a way of getting back to people who don't have any moral compass. Karina tripped off a beer case and broke her neck, and Bogdan drowned in the river behind the bar. Weird situations. Anyway, back to the man in question. He finished drinking at noon and tried to come home with his wagon. He couldn't steer it properly, and when he yelled at the horse to move faster, the poor animal got scared and sped up. Father fell and the horse kicked him in the face. From the kick, the man landed with his left temple on a pointy rock. A large pool of blood formed under his head, and the incident claimed his life. He died with his eyes open and mouth agape, his whole face frozen in horror. One of the village elders, a man named Janos, found him laying in the middle of the road. He came to our house and let my mom know about the accident. She didn't hear me sneak out of the house. I studied their demeanor from a distance and knew that Mom would be at peace. I felt as if God had lifted an enormous burden from my chest. Janos was her father and my grandfather, but he wasn't much present in our life. He also didn't know about the violent nature of my father. He and Mother always had a cold and distant relationship. Still, I think they cared for one another, even though it wasn't what one would call a traditional father-daughter relationship. "Marita, what happened?" Janos asked. "I fell face down on the stairs," Mother said, averting his gaze. Janos wanted to ask more questions but didn't. Deep down he knew Mother lied to him regarding the actual motive of her injuries. "Listen, I came here about your husband. He's dead. I found him a little while ago on the road. Fell off his wagon and hit his head on a rock. I'm sorry." He hugged my mom and kissed her on the head. She didn't say a thing. She only nodded and glanced past him in the distance, searching for a face in the clouds, reaching for someone to thank for what had happened. I sensed she wasn't happy with the situation, but she was relieved. "Can you take me to see him? Is he still there?" Mom asked. She could barely contain the trembling in her hands. I heard the voice of villagers gathered around my father's body from afar. A lot of gasps and old ladies who made cross signs in disbelief. "Poor man, I heard he drank a lot," a drunk guy said. "May he rest in peace in the kingdom of God," said another gray-haired woman. "I heard he beat his woman and boy every morning," a blonde woman whispered to her friend. "He didn't die of a good death," old lady Samina Kurbin said. Now those words made my heart sink. Samina Kurbin was a peculiar woman. The village folks said that she did nefarious stuff inside her house. At times, red candlelight would burn in her window at night, and green smoke would come out of the chimney in the middle of the day. They said she was an evil witch who was in a league with Satan. I never saw anything wrong happen while passing by her house. A friend said that strange things happened one day in his backyard. He said 6 of his hens died. 6 of his goats foamed at the mouth and blood poured out of their eyes. And he found 6 black frogs under a bucket after a heavy afternoon rain. He laughed when telling this because his grandmother made him pee on the frogs, poured gasoline over them and set them on fire. They went out in flames, a black smoke dissipating in the air. He swore that he heard a voice inside that smoke, telling him that his grandfather would die in 3 days. He said the frogs fixated on him, and he felt dizzier by the minute. That's when his mom came to the rescue. She grabbed his arm, splashed a handful of cold water on his face, and gave him a glass of water with 7 burnt matches inside. His family thought that Madame Kurbin casted an evil spell against them because she didn't like seeing people happy and healthy. Many other weird things happened in that village, many of which I have personally seen or experienced in the 43 years that I've lived here. This beautiful country, Romania, has seen its fair share of supernatural events, but that's for another time to discuss. Now, back to what happened with my father. After hearing what Madame Kurbin said, I dreaded the worst things would happen. I studied his death pose. He had wet his pants and the blood under his temple had turned to black and thick, a coagulated painting made of doom and gloom. The black horse observed me from afar. At one point it nodded as if it was the one that granted my wish. I didn't even flinch upon seeing my messed up father's corpse. I kneeled beside him and studied his dead features. The ghastly wide eyes stuck forever in horror and death. The open mouth as if he screamed upon arrival to the gates below. Janosch and a few other men lifted the corpse from the ground and placed it in the wagon. And then they took him home where they cleaned, shaved, bathed, and gave him new clothing. No one came to mourn him. I was angry because I didn't want to see him in that house anymore. Yet there he was. Even in death, he found fit to stay for a while more. Night come and I snuck out of my room to see him again. His face was all pale, the lips a dark purple, arms crossed on his chest. I couldn't help but smile. He didn't deserve to be groomed and well-dressed like that. Instead, I would have poured alcohol on him and set his body on fire. Death by his own devices. I sighed, closed my eyes, and smiled again, thinking that the monster was gone once and for all. Mother didn't want to waste one more second with him in the house. The burial took place early the next day. A few villagers came, but not because they wanted to be there. They came for the food and drinks that my mom would give out at the wake. The gravedigger slowly but steadily descended the coffin into the hole. 6 feet under, the coffin was nailed shut and swallowed by the earth. My father would become food for maggots, his insides rotting into nothingness. In the end, nothing could stop these sands of time. The funeral ended and a few villagers returned home to drink and eat at the wake. I just sat in a corner waiting for the charade to end, because the monster didn't deserve to be remembered as a regular person does. But traditions don't care about who was who or what kind of person they were. "Poor man," said one lady dressed in black and with a face white as a ghost. "May he rest in peace," said an old man with a black wool hat. "His poor family, how will they live from now on?" said another man half drunk. He sipped some more wine and ate a chicken thigh. His mouth was oily. He belched while a piece of chicken fell from his mouth, staining his already yellowed and sweaty shirt. I remember thinking that people would say anything without knowing a specific situation. I couldn't stand the gossip anymore and went to the last man and whispered that my mom and I would live just fine from then on. One less idiot in the world. One less violent man that nobody would ever miss or shed a tear for. After a few hours, everybody left, and an unusual silence filled the house. Unusual because that time would be when Father came home drunk for the second time of the day, and he would start shouting and breaking things. Janosch left last. He told Mom to take care of her and me and that he would check up on us. Life went on as it should have. The village folks soon forgot about the accident, and it seemed as if my dad were never there. And I loved that. I wanted to tear down his grave sometimes. I wanted to destroy his cross and burn that awful photo on it. A few weeks went by, nothing happened. Until that fateful night. Tuesday, October 10th, 1995. The bizarre events began in the morning. An unusual fog enveloped the entire village, making it hard to see even a few feet ahead. Mother sent me to get the milk from Old Lady Victoria's house. On my way there, I passed Madame Servant's house and saw her in her front dirty window. She glanced at me and grinned. Her cracked lips, dry saliva in the corner of her mouth, and her yellow-stained and crooked teeth made my heart beat 10 times faster. She waved at me in slow motion and then slowly retreated into the darkness of her home. I heard a faint animal cry and then silence. Her dog observed me through these spaces between her fence but didn't bark. I felt like the woman had studied me through that dog's eyes. As I left that crooked house behind, my heart rate returned to normal. Mrs. Victoria gave me 2 bottles of warm, fresh milk, told me to say hello to my father and that she would visit her soon. She was a good woman. May God rest her soul. I remember she gave me some homemade sour cherry jam too. I paid only for the milk and thanked her for the present. She died a few years ago at the age of 93. She had no kids and no relatives left alive, and I thought it would be nice to take her off her grave, keep it clean, and remove the weeds and stains from the cross. The fog thickened when I went back. I could only see 10 or maybe 12 steps ahead. All the houses on the right and left sides of the road became lost in the fog. I sighed, relieved that I wouldn't see behind Madam's servant's fence or inside of the house. Thank God for that. Yet as I walked back home, I could see a strange shape forming in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a large animal, maybe a pig, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I wiped my eyes to see if I had imagined it. Now the apparition seemed closer to a human body. It came towards me, a low-pitched whispered groan breaking the silence around me. Madam's servant stopped 3 feet in front of me. I thought she levitated in the air. She had mushrooms in her hair, twigs, and small animal bones and skulls. A rat and a chicken, and a dried frog adorned her unkempt hair. She opened her mouth and a swarm of worms fell on the gravel. Her eyes, 2 black spots, observed me with malice intent. Little boy, why didn't you say hello when you first came through?" she asked. She grabbed both my shoulders and I felt her hands squeezing while her fingers grew longer. I wanted to speak, but the words remained stuck in the back of my throat. "It's starting tonight, you know. It's all coming back and there's no way of stopping it. All the suffering and torment your mother and you thought was left behind is coming back to haunt you again," she said. She laughed like a maniac. Her head jerked backward while the thick cloud of black smoke flew toward the sky from her mouth. "Let me go!" I screamed from the top of my lungs. I didn't know how I found my words, but I was glad because she let me go. "You go tell your mother it's coming. The plague is coming," she screamed. I glanced back and she had vanished into the fog. I ran home almost running out of breath and noticed that the fog was slowly dissipating. A murder of crows circled my house, maybe 10 or 20 meters above. They cawed as the black and dark gray clouds appeared in the sky. Thunder boomed in the distance. I thought the end of days had arrived, and that's what she had talked about. "Vlad, come quickly, get inside, the storm's coming." My mother cried from the backyard. "I have to lock the animals and chickens and then I'll join you." "All right, mother," I replied. I placed the milk on the kitchen table. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the whole kitchen. I grabbed one and ripped a corner and stuffed it in my mouth. Before I knew it, half the loaf was gone. I wanted to make more but dropped when I saw what remained was rotten, moldy, and worms danced inside of it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and it all returned to normal. Maybe it was all from the shock of meeting Madame Kerbin. That evil witch scared the living soul out of me. Mother soon had finished the chores and the rain began pouring. It was a heavy storm, and the raindrops banged against the tin roof in a staccato rhythm. I watched it all outside through the living room window. Mother came inside and gave a big bowl of chicken soup and scolded me mildly for eating half of the bread. I said that it is what it is. At least she had to feed only 2 mouse instead of 3. She didn't like it, but I only said the truth. Night soon came and the storm went away. She tucked me into bed, kissed me on the cheek, and said goodnight. I fell asleep in an instant. Strange nightmares came into focus. In this dream, I was in the field behind the village church, glancing at the moon that loomed over the ancient hills. Behind me, I heard noises as if somebody was digging the dirt in the cemetery, but it didn't sound like a burial like dirt hitting the coffin. No, to me, it was the other way around. It was as if a dead person wanted to dig themselves out and stay longer on this earth instead of heaven or below. The nightmare transported me to the front of my father's grave. The cross was broken in half, and the grave was dug out. The coffin had been opened and the body was missing. My father decided to come back to life, and it scares me so bad that I remember waking up panting to a soft tap on the window. Tapping and then slow motion scratching against the window. The sound made me jump out of the bed. I looked outside to see the intruder, my dead father or maybe Madame Kerbin, but I saw no one there. Then from the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a figure moving outside the house. I blinked and saw no one there. Relieved, I went back to bed, but not before studying the ceiling for a few more minutes. What would the meaning of that awful dream be? Was it from the earlier shock and the fog? Was it because I thought my father would haunt us deep inside, even from the grave? I was scared, but somehow I managed to go back to sleep, only to wake up again in the dead of night. My mother's screams pierced the walls of the house. I jumped out of bed and ran to check on her. I turned on the lights and saw her twisting and turning in bed, her whole face red and sweaty. "He's on top of me, he wants to eat me, he wants to kill me." She had cried, but nobody was there. "Mom, wake up," I screamed. "He tried choking me," she said. "Who tried to?" "Your father," she exclaimed. I stood petrified. There were too many coincidences for this only to be an illusion or hallucination. The encounter with Madame Kerbin and all that happened after what she said, the crows above my house, the heavy storm, my nightmare, the tapping and scratching on the window, and my mother's scare all meant something. What she said was true because all around her neck, she had hand marks as if somebody had tried to strangle her. I gave her a glass of water and tried to calm her down and comfort her. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I whispered. I then told her about all that happened until I awoke to her screams. "Strigoi," she said, and all the blood had drained from her face and she became as white as a sheet. "I feel sick, Vlad, very sick. I think he's trying to kill me, and God only knows that I can't let you on your own in this dying and twisted world. You need to go and get Janusz here at the crack of dawn. He was born on a Saturday. He can see the strigoi." Wednesday, October 11th, 1995. That morning, Mom told me to check the animals and see if everything was all right with them. It wasn't. They were all dead, drained of blood, and hung upside down on a wire Mother used to dry washed clothes. I wanted to tell her this, but she was already asleep. I then left for my grandfather's house. He lived alone. I never knew my grandmother. She had died when giving birth to my mom. Maybe that was why part of the cold relationship between my mother and Janusz came. Maybe he held her responsible for his wife's death. Janusz was on the road. He had returned from the woods with a dead deer in his wagon, 3 buckets of mushrooms, and 2 large trouts. "What are you doing here, son? Shouldn't you be sleeping?" he asked. "Sir, something's happened to my mom. She's got a fever. She is sick. It's terrible," I replied. "Here, help me get these inside and we'll talk," he told me. I grabbed the trouts and 2 buckets full of mushrooms. In one, he had penny buns and Caesar's mushrooms. "You got lucky today, huh?" I asked. In his other bucket, he had golden chanterelles. He took the deer with one hand and threw it over his shoulder like it was nothing. I wonder what my life would have been like if I had had a father. Sheer determination, power, will, and discipline. He looked very healthy too. He nodded and invited me inside. He had a small house and liked living modestly, with as few earthly possessions as possible. Inside was a room that served as a bedroom and living room, a small kitchen where he mainly cooked stews from what he hunted, and a small bathroom with a tub and sink. He had only a handful of chickens in his backyard, 3 turkeys, a cow, 2 dogs, and a cat. He said he didn't like having pigs or eating their meat. He sat me on a chair in the kitchen and I told him about yesterday's events. He glanced at the wall behind me for a moment, not saying anything. I saw a picture of the Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus painted on wood. A priest gave me this 30 years ago. He said that it would come in handy in times like these. I guess your good-for-nothing father can't rest, and we'll have to kill him again, he said, making the sign of the cross 3 times. Kill my father again. I hated him with all my soul. I have many reasons for doing so, Janosch. Many reasons. I can't tell you how many times I wanted him dead, or how many times that I wished for him to get in an accident and slowly bleed or suffocate to death. I said, there are things you don't know, grandfather. I'm afraid I know what you're talking about, son. I didn't want to intervene, but I can do so now, he sighed. I don't know why I called him like that. Probably because I never had an actual father figure in my life. He liked it because his face lit up and he stroked my hair. He said that he would come to check on Mother right away and be back in the afternoon with deer stew and cooked mushrooms. He said he knew what needed to be done and that the process would be ugly. Mother was still sleeping when we came back. She said to leave them alone so that they could talk, but Janosch insisted that I should stay. I like my grandchild very much, Marietta. He seems like a brave young man with a strong mind and an immaculate soul. I want him to help me with this endeavor. Do you want to, Vlad? He asked me. There's nothing that I would like more than helping you kill the monster for a second time. I'm not afraid. I'm not like him, a failure, a crook, a violent man. I want only what's best for my mother, I replied. See, Marietta, he's just like me, Janosch said. He glanced at me and smiled. You're going to do great in life, son. Father, I don't think that's a good idea. He's only a child after all, she whimpered. I know, but he wants to be there and I want him to be there. His strong determination would help immensely in stopping this cancer, this pestilence, this ravenous curse that started eating at you last night. He needs you alive so that you can raise him. And when you get old, he'll be the one to take care of you, all right. Janosch replied, grabbing Mother's hand and caressing it. Janosch said that we couldn't involve the village priest because he would be legally obliged to alert the authorities, and that was something that nobody wanted. He went on to say that this needed to be done the old way. Only a handful of people knew how to do this. He would go to some of his old friends and tell them about this, and in the afternoon, he would be back with food and a plan. He was adamant that my mother would be healthy again and these strigoi would be gone. He told me that we had to start at midnight so my mother's condition wouldn't deteriorate. I showed him the dead animals, and before he left, he gathered them in a pile and set them on fire. He said that that was the sign of the strigoi. He left his mark on our house and poisoned the ground with those dead animals, so we had to burn them. The smell of sizzling flesh and feathers made me sick to my stomach, and the heavy dense smoke filled my lungs with dread and cadaverous horror. We gathered the ashes, poured holy water over them, and buried them in these small woods behind my house. Janosch firmly shook my hand, thanked me for helping him, and said that he would return around 4 p.m. He instructed me to take care of my mother as best I could. And so I did, until he returned. I changed her bedding and clothes, made her tea and gave her some of that delicious soup that she made, and told her that everything would be fine. The hours came and went. I was focused on the task at hand, having only one thought: my mother would survive and be healthy again. Besides the obvious thing that worried me, my dad coming back from the grave to haunt my mom and possibly me, another thought came into view. What was Madame Kerbin's involvement in this? She had been there from the beginning. She was on the side of the road saying father didn't die a good death. Was she the one who facilitated his end? Was this some sort of experiment that she had to see if she could control the strigoi and possibly make more and control them to do her bidding? "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Mom said, barely opening her eyes. "Did you eat?" "Yes, Mother, I'm fine. Here, you should eat some more." I gave her soup and bread and told her that she needed it to regain her strength. She ate the remaining half bowl and went back to sleep. I rubbed her forehead with a clean cloth to wipe the sweat beads away. I held my thought about the Madame Kerbin theory in the back of my head and would ask Janosch when he had come back for an opinion. Janosch came back at 4 p.m. sharp, precisely as he said. He had brought 3 men with him. All of them were respected people of the city. Their rough faces told me that they had seen bad things over the years. He gave me the food, for which I thanked him. "Vlad, come here. Let me introduce you to George, Niku, and Marin. They will help us with what we need to do. We'll stand guard here at your house tonight to see if the strigoi comes again." I nodded. "Janosch, can I ask you something?" I said, raising my eyebrows. "Of course, child, what is it? I see something else is troubling you." I told him what I thought about Madame Kerbin, all that happened since she was there on the side of the road when my drunk father died. What she said, what she looked like when I met her in the fog, the pig-shaped body, her black abyssal eyes, the worms that fell from her mouth, the smoke that flew out of her throat and into the sky, the murder of crows that circled over my house, the nightmare I had, the tapping and scratching at my window and the silhouette that I saw outside of the house. Janosch turned to the 3 men whose faces were now as white as snow. They said that they only heard stories about Madame Kerbin and were always suspicious about what she did inside of her house, but they never heard about something like this. They spoke between them, confused but eager to find out the truth. "What if we break into her house at night and see if we find something?" Janosch asked. "I don't know why, but I trust this kid. He's my blood after all." "I think I know someone who can help us with information about her," Marin said. "Elizabeta." Silence in the room. No one had ever dared to talk about that woman. She was 104 years old at the time. She lived alone in a small hut atop the hill. People would go and talk to her if they had problems. Janosch said that he went to her after his wife's death because he didn't have anywhere else to go. But she was sick then and they never got around to seeing her talking again. She did tell him to come back, but she never did. "I guess it's time for me to go there right now, isn't it? I haven't seen her since I was a little boy," Janosch said. "Can I come?" I asked. "She's a living legend in my house. Mom told me lots of good things about her." Janosch told me that it would be wiser to stay with my mother and care for her if she needed it. The 3 men remained outside the porch to make sure that nothing terrible happened. During the 2 hours that he was gone, Mother's condition worsened. She kept whimpering and shuffled in the bed. Cold shivers alternated with hot ones. It was as if she was trapped in a never-ending nightmare from which she could not wake up. I made her open her mouth to force feed her and give her tea to fight off the mental infection of the strigoi. Oh, how I wanted to be the one to rip out its heart and feed it to the dogs. I imagined myself doing that with a massive grin on my face, thankful to the gods that they provided me with the opportunity. Before I knew it, 2 hours had passed and Janusz was back. He seemed to have aged 20 years, and his eyes were red as if he'd cried a lot and couldn't stop. "Are you all right, Janusz?" George asked. "Yes, but I need to sit down and catch my breath. The information I received is a lot to take in. Some of it is personal, and I will share it only with Vlad and Marietta when the time comes. I only hope that we'll pull through this. We are men, and by God, we'll kill that thing one way or another," he said. "Now, let me tell you what's of interest for the task at hand." We all sat around the kitchen table as Janusz told us precisely what to do, and it wasn't a beautiful thing, but it was necessary. Elizabeta told Janusz what everyone already knew. She was a witch who tried everything possible to communicate with the devil. She was the one responsible for my father's accident, because he was an easy target and already a great candidate for becoming a strigoi. His heart was filled with hate. He was an evil and violent man, and he didn't have respect for anything. He just wasted his days away at the local bar waiting for the end. The end came sooner thanks to Madame Kerbin's witchery. She appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the road, just as she did with me, but was only visible to the horse. She controlled the horse and father's fall, resulting in his violent death. A violent man's life ending violently. Madame Kerbin killed in the name of the devil, bringing him a sacrifice in flesh and blood. The devil didn't want the deceased soul yet and let it roam free in the darkness of the night, to claim more victims and instill fear in the soul of the innocent. In addition, Elizabeta encouraged going after Madame Kerbin at night when she was asleep. She gave Janusz a small bottle filled with a greenish-purple liquid that moved around in slow motion. She also gave us 5 silver crosses to ward off whatever evil we encountered. She told Janusz that she wanted to meet me as fast as possible because she liked hearing about brave children who wanted to fight off evil, protect their parents and their land. I smiled at that. Then Janusz came to the gist of it. Kerbin had a secret tunnel underneath her house that connected to the cemetery. She would sometimes steal bodies or remains and use them for food and other black magic. Elizabeta said that she had stopped her numerous times before, but as she got older, she also got weaker, and her powers weren't what they used to be. "Wow," I gasped. "This village is much more than meets the eye." "In these parts of the world, evil has many faces, son, and we need strong and smart men and women who can ward that evil off, or else it will eat away at our souls and minds, poisoning them until there is nothing left." Elizabeta said that we should try and take as many things as possible from the witch's house and bring them to her. She would probably be aware of our arrival and not risk getting caught, but she would leave traps behind. She also gave Janusz clear instructions on how to deal with the strigoi, what to say and do so that the curse was broken, and that Mother would get better. Janusz would need to place 3 leaves in an egg made by a black hen when the sun settles. That was customary for someone believed to be sick because of a strigoi. Night came, and with it, an all too familiar silence. I thought it was calm before the storm, but I hoped my mom would be healthy again. "Gentlemen, we'll stay here until midnight and see if the strigoi comes again. If all is good, we will go to the witch's house, down through the tunnel, and into the cemetery. Janosch said. Vlad, you and I are born on a Saturday. It means that we can see the spirit when it comes. You've seen it last night, even if only for a second, but you've seen its ugly face. I nodded. The drops of time fell in the hourglass of my heart and midnight came. A glass broke, a heavy thud in the bedroom. He's here, I whispered. I saw its bluish-white face with red eyes studying me. It hissed, hunched, and wagged its tail. He jumped all over the house like a headless chicken. Janosch, do you see him? I cried. Yes, he replied. Stop it, you're killing me, get off me, Mom said. The strigoi was on top of her, his mouth connecting with her jugular. For a few seconds, he drank my mom's blood. Janosch screamed some words that I assumed he knew from Elizabeta. Strigoi, be gone. I'll splash you with wine, I'll smoke you with basil. I'll burn incense inside your mouth. Your heart I'll take. Upon hearing these words, the strigoi cringed, hunched forward and vanished in the night, jumping right outside the same window that he came through. Mom panted and screamed. If he comes one more time, I'll die. I can't take this any longer, she said. The three men looked at Janosch as if he were their lieutenant who led the final attack against the citadel of evil. Niku ran back home and got his wife to stay with my mom and take care of her, until we returned back, or until we didn't. We walked in a line to Madame Kerbin's house. I felt as if the house had 1,000 eyes set on us and ready for the kill. The moon illuminated the sky above and studied our every move, staring at us wonderfully. We broke in through the back and found ourselves in an abnormally large corridor that seemed to exceed the house's length. Large black and red candles burned on each side, and the flames sent shadows dancing like little devious devils on the walls. We tiptoed forward until we reached what was the kitchen. Large glass jars filled with dead frogs, mutated tadpoles, chicken heads, severely deformed fish, and taxidermied rats stood on pieces of wood stapled to the walls. Christ Almighty, guide our steps through this ordeal, said George. We all made the sign of the cross 3 times and pushed into the unknown. Get your axes ready, Janosch said. I have a feeling things will be getting ugly. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. As we moved around the kitchen, trying our best to stay silent, the rays of the moon fell through the window, as if God had illuminated our way, and a large red door took shape. I think this might be it, Niku said. The tunnel that leads to the cemetery. Janosch closed his eyes for a few seconds inside. As much as I would like to stay here and search the house, maybe even kill Kerbin, I feel that she's long gone. The only logical thing we should be doing is going and taking that monster's heart so my daughter would live, Janosch said. Marin slowly pushed on the door handle and opened the door. A set of stairs led into a dimly lit tunnel, and we descended. The height from the ground up scared me. There were also red streaks of liquid which I assumed to be blood given the location. A high-pitched wailing reverberated through the tunnel, making the walls shake. A woman's evil laugh followed. Madame Kerbin was there with us. Oh, I waited for you. Do you honestly think you'll live through this? She screamed. Her voice came in waves and it made my ears hurt. She laughed again. Begone, servant of Satan, Marin said. More laughing. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so on earth. Amen. Niku prayed. Little boy, I like you very much. I think you'll make a nice addition to my collection of strigoi. You haven't been baptized yet, have you? What? Janos asked. I don't know, I screamed. I never went to church. Janos sensed fear climbing up my spine and slowly taking hold of my brain. Oh, don't worry. I'll take you first thing tomorrow to Father Serbu, and we'll baptize you, he whispered. That's not going to happen, witch. Over our dead bodies, Marin screamed. Bring it on, Niku roared. The laughing grew fainter. Thick black fog filled the tunnel. I squinted and saw a humanoid body taking form at the end of the corridor. It stood on two legs that ended in pig hooves and slowly breathed, as if waiting for a charge. It had an upper body with fresh cuts on its torso, as if scratched by long nails. Thick black fur covered its dark brown skin. It had a pig's head, and small red eyes shimmered while studying us. It had a golden ring in its snout, and blood dripped from each side of its mouth as it revealed decayed and rotted teeth. An inversed cross glimmered in the center of its forehead. Protect the kid, Janos said. We kill this unholy beast. I stood behind them. The beast began taking small steps towards us. I saw his evil grin as he spoke with Madame Kerbin's altered voice. This is one of my children. I love him and he loves me. He's one of the best I had, the pig said. It took me a lot of tries to get him done. Be gone, beast. Take your creator with you, Janos cried. The evil one has no business being here in these lands. Oh, but he is ever present. I am his servant and I do his bidding. He promised me many things no mortal could ever dream of having. How do you think I could bring a dead body back to life and improve it as I had with my child? The pig asked. Oh no, this means only one thing, I said. I swallowed hard in disbelief. This village was much more than it seemed on the surface. Evil lurked at every corner, and the stories that I would later hear would only cement that idea. But it also had its protectors, good people who lived in the shadows, minding their own business, who had been fighting it for centuries before I was born. The black pig charged towards us in big leaps. I also saw that it had two medium-sized sharp horns that could be used to puncture through skin. Janos was first, Niku and Martin behind him. George stood before me to make sure that he had a chance of hitting before the beast claimed my life too. If not for them, I would have been only dead meat. Come on, filthy beast, Janos said as he smashed his axe on the floor. Sparks flew all over the place, but the pig didn't even flinch. He ducked and kneeled on one leg, and the pig jumped over him. The axe caressed his underbelly as everything inside fell on the ground in Janos. Niku and Marin stuck their axes in its head, while George finished it off by decapitating it. The brave men had killed the beast. The red lights in its eyes were extinguished and its grin was gone. A high-pitched wailing filled the tunnel and then silence. The pig lay motionless on the ground, and we all thanked God Almighty that this was over. A set of stairs appeared at the end of the tunnel. We climbed and found ourselves in the woods behind the cemetery. When we looked back, there was nothing there. Not the stairs, not the tunnel, only the woods. The pale moon seemed relieved that we had escaped. It didn't look so sad anymore. We caught our breath for a few minutes and entered the cemetery through a broken part of the metal fence. It was the first time that I had been in a cemetery at night. An owl hooted atop the church's spire and it watched us. I was afraid that it was Madame Kerbin's sentry. Maybe I was just being paranoid. You were brave back there. The devil could not defeat God, He tried once and he fell into his fiery pits. Now he tries to mess with the minds of children of God, but we will not let them. As long as we and our kin stand in this land, the devil will never win. Marietta will be healthy again. This child will grow tall and strong and protect his own people. God makes this village. It will never be destroyed by the evil one and its followers. Janosch said. Let's finish this once and for all, Marin said. God forgive us, Niku said as he broke the lock of the church's tool shed. We will only borrow a few shovels to save an innocent life. The men got to digging. I studied my father's face in the picture on the cross. He looked normal enough. Behind his eyes, there was nothing wrong to be seen. I closed my eyes briefly and remembered every bit that he had put my mother and me through. You can't rest until you cause some more damage, now can you, monster? I said and spat on his cross. I heard Marin's shovel hit the coffin. The moment of truth, gentlemen, Janosch said. Niku, George, try and pry it open with your shovels. My father's body was in pristine condition. He looked like he was sleeping after a long day of work. He sat on his side as Janosch turned him over. He had fresh blood on his as if he had just fed. My mother's blood. You evil monster, I said. I gritted my teeth to keep it together. I could feel my eyes watering with tears of hate and anger. His beard had grown too. We're all men here. We're not afraid of anything and have courage in our hearts, even you, boy. What I'll do right now is not for the faint of heart, Janosch said. I'd heard the village folk talk about what you should do in case a strigoi ever appears, how the exorcism ritual needed to be done, and the malevolent spirit cast out back to where it came from. And by God, that's where my father needed to be for eternity, boiling in the cauldrons with hot tar, over and over again, and seeing how my mother and I felt when he applied his much-needed physical disciplinary correction, as he had called it. Can I do it? I asked, extending my arm. Janosch made big eyes as if he couldn't believe what I had requested. Are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. I grabbed the knife and jumped down into the hole. I stood over my father's corpse, holding the knife tightly. I said the following before beginning the ritual. Strigoi, I'll splash you with wine, I'll smoke you with basil. I'll burn incense inside your mouth. Your heart I'll take, cut it with a knife into 9 pieces. Throw it over 9 valleys for 9 dogs to eat. Strigoi, you shall eat your own heart, your insides, your liver, your flesh and bone. I closed my eyes, struck his chest and pulled down. Inside his chest, there was a pool of fresh blood. I proceeded to rip out his ribcage so that I could take the heart out. After doing so, I placed it in a bag and got out of the hole while the 4 men resealed and reburied the coffin. The next step was to go to a crossroad, stake the heart and char it. We got there and made a small fire. The heart hissed as if it was dying slowly. We then had to return home and burn the heart for a second time until it turned to ash. Janosch said that he had learned all about this from Elisabetta. I had to take the ashes and make it into some tea and have mother drink it. My stomach twisted upon hearing that, but there was no other way. I had to save my mother's life. I poured warm water into a big cup, and then I mixed in my father's heart remains. When I got inside the house, I noticed that she was burning up. I hurried in and gave her the drink. Her back arched and she clenched her fist while screaming. She then fell flat onto the bed into a deep slumber until morning. I didn't even notice when the sun rose. Its warm rays entered the house and caressed my mother's face, lighting it up like she was given a second chance at life. She moaned as she slowly opened her eyes. "Vlad, are you all right?" she asked, coughing. "Yes, Mother, how are you feeling?" I asked back, my voice trembled. "Brand new, dear boy," she replied with tears. The strigoi didn't return, meaning that what we did was the right thing. And from that day on, Yonosh and I got very close, and he taught me many things and we did many things together. But those are stories for another time. I went to the church and got baptized the next day, and then went to visit Elizabeta. She told me my grandmother's death was Madame Kerbin's fault. She had placed a spell on her and wanted to kill her while pregnant. Elizabeta found out too late about this and couldn't do anything except save my mother's life. I swore there and then that I would find that evil witch and kill her too. I write these words with tears in my eyes. My mother is alive and well. She managed to push through all the bad things that had happened to her. I'm taking care of her even now, and the only death she'll know will be a quiet and peaceful death. As for Yonosh, I miss him every day. He was a man of great courage, and I still have his picture with me wherever I go. I like to think that he protects me. May God help us all. Amen.